All right, so let's move on to Alabama guard, and I'm hoping I'm saying this right. Labaron Philon. I hope there's not some different emphasis on somewhere in Labaron that makes me sound really dumb. But Labaron, owner of the best hair in this draft, listed at 6'4", 177 pounds. I think the real reason Coop loves him is because his measurements are basically exactly the same as DQ Giroux. He's a November 24th, 2005 birthday, so he's about a month younger than Jase Richardson, but still, a little bit. I don't want to call your rookie season being your age 20 season. I don't want to call that being old for a freshman or a rookie, but it's not young. You're not a 19-year-old doing it. I do think that is worth noting. Anymore, you would say this is almost the average age, right? This is the quintuple age. This is, a lot of guys we're talking about are this age, but I do think it's worth noting. This season, Alabama averaged 10.6 points, 3.3 rebounds, 3.8 assists, 1.4 steals, 0.3 blocks on 45.2, 31.5, 76.7 shooting splits. Did start quite a bit, but wasn't a big minute guy, only 24.7 minutes per game. I think it's really notable that he didn't close a lot for Alabama. They would go to different closing lineups pretty consistently. But I will say this was maybe the worst spaced Alabama team we've seen in a while, partially because Grant Nelson just couldn't make shots at a consistent enough level, but the spacing was not great for this team overall. For some more advanced stats, 21.4 usage rate, not crazy good, but not super unbelievably low like Jase Richardson, I suppose. 51.4 effective field goal rate, 54.9 true shooting, 3.8 offensive rebound rate, 9.3 defensive rebound rate, 24.9 assist rate. That's maybe the most encouraging offensive number. 17.2 turnover rate, not horrible there. 1.2 block rate, 2.9 steal rate, 28.7 free throw rate. He dunked 5 times, shot 58.1% at the rim on 136 attempts, 44.4% on long twos on 54 long two attempts. Only 90 free throw attempts, 76.7% there. And then did take 7.1 3-point attempts for 100 possessions. So basically the same 3-point attempt rate as Jase, but that only shot 31.5% on those. Coop, I know you're the guy who's really high on Philon. Let's start with his defense, because I think the sell here is this is a defense-first guard in the mold of, I'm sure he's gotten his DeJounte Murray comps. Similar to DeJounte Murray, has some interesting tattoo sleeves. You see the Michael Myers right there. DeJounte has the big, gigantic basketball on his shoulder. So both owners of some interesting little tattoos, but also both long, skinny, solid athletes who create some havoc. So, Coop, what do you like about his defense?
I think the big sell is that he's just a pest. Like, he is a huge bother at the point of attack. He's kind of skinny, so he's not like really super able to handle switches or anything, but he was getting switched onto 6'10" guys in the deep post, and he was putting up a fight. And I think he's kind of deceptively skinny. I think it really shows on the offensive end, but he's kind of the opposite of Jase, where he just uses every single bit of his athleticism on both ends to he tries really hard. He throws all of his weight into stopping a guy trying to post him up. He throws all of his weight into a ball handler, and he's just like a bother. He's just all over. He's athletic. He's making rotations. They're not always perfect rotations. He's not always, making the most, the best closeouts. He can overshoot them. He can be a little jumpy at times, but I really like his energy. I think he's the kind of defender who, even though the stocks numbers aren't like crazy, 2.9 steal rate is pretty solid, but it's not like exceptional, nothing crazy. I think he's just the kind of defender that you can see yourself bringing in, can defend, both guard positions. Maybe he puts on a little bit of weight and he can guard up to threes. I think he's just got he's got a really good combination of what he does now and what he potential to do stuff down the line, because he just tries really hard and he's, I wouldn't say he's super high field, but he knows where to be. and he wants to make plays happen. So I'm really into. He's like a very Cooper Klein style of defender. Just hustles his ass off.
So my issue is that I think that the motor sometimes. I like that the motor. I think it runs hot. I think he plays hard. I think he's really annoying. He's clapping in guys' face. I love all that shit. What I don't like is I don't think he's actually good at guarding on the ball right now. I think the screen nav is really bad, and he's not a great recovery defender. That's one of those things where, like, as good as the motor looks at times, I do think the second and third efforts are pretty mediocre right now. And he's not always really making hard efforts to get back into plays. Now, I will say that when he is guarding at the nail, I think his defense is really good. I think his digs are good. I think he has pretty good hands, good instincts. He wasn't really put in that situation a lot. They had him lock and trail a lot. But the truth is, I don't think he's an on-ball stopper. Walter Clayton, I mean, fucking murdered him. And maybe Walter Clayton's like an NBA star guard. I haven't watched him close enough. I don't know. But that to me was a bad sign. And then I watched him play against Augustus Marshallonis. And every time Marshallonis got a screen, Philon never got back in front. He was really stuck behind plays. And Marshallonis is not an NBA player. I'm spoiling for you guys. He is always struggled against better competition. And Philon looks kind of out of place guarding him. And in a lot of the other games I watched, he was never making a real impact on the ball other than the occasional poke. And I think some of that's the strength. I think some of that is that his foot quickness is not as good as you would maybe think. I think his overall athletic profile is worse than guys who are given this comp often. And, I think there's a lot of guys to look at when it comes to that. But I think maybe an easy one is, DeJounte Murray was a way better overall athlete. And if that's who you're kind of comparing him to, I think a lot of the guys in this world were much better. When Edmund Sumner, much better overall athlete, vertical athlete. I think all that stuff really matters for guys. And I just don't think Labaron has that top end athletic outcome. So even though I like the motor, I think he's a really good nail help guy. I think he can chase shooters around pretty well. I think he has some real moments where he plays passing lanes. I think the hands are good. I don't think he is very good as an on-ball defender right now. And I think a lot of his issues are not ones that can be fixed in terms of his foot quickness. I think his foot cleverness can get better. He doesn't have particularly quick hips, in my opinion. He doesn't get through screens very well. I don't know that he's the type of guy who can add meaningful strength. So I think you're talking about a guy who you actually want as more of a havoc creator. And I wonder if he can maybe do a little bit more as like a low man in terms of making decisions in that way and, what have you. But I'm not really sold on him defensively. And I think being so much of the sell is a real worry for me. I also think, he's an awful rebounder. He's a really bad sense for how the ball comes off the rim. He doesn't really try to get involved there. He doesn't box out. And there's just too many times for a guy like this where he just gets completely dusted in one-on-one scenarios. Like, it's just that type of stuff is really hard for me to overlook. As much as I do like some of the ancillary skills and I like the motherfuckerness to him, I'm just not sold all the way on him having kind of the most important parts of guard defense. And so and we'll talk about the offense, but with the offensive questions, if I'm not fully sold on a guy as a defensive player, I'm not really sure how high I can get.
So one thing, sorry, Stone, I need to gush a little bit, but I do think that Philon is the kind of guard who you're okay with. I think but NBA teams have really kind of abused guards who can't make low man rotations. I have watched the Rockets struggle with this all season because they have Jalen Green and Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks get put into having to help as low man, as the low man making rotations defensively. And I've seen it in the playoffs time and time again, where they just station whoever the guard is guarding in the corner, And I think Philon is the kind of guard who you trust to make rotations and do stuff like that. And I think he can figure out these kinds of more difficult parts of being an NBA defender. Because as much as we want to talk about guards being like, oh, he's an on-ball stopper and that's kind of his main job, there's a lot more to NBA defense than just that. And I think Philon is really good at all the other stuff that comes with being an NBA level defensive guard. And honestly, I have not really I like the motherfucker isms, but I don't know. I don't get the DeJounte Murray comp stuff. I don't get all that. That's not really why I like him. I think he's just athletic, tries hard, and he does a lot of the surrounding supporting stuff that you need your defensive guards to do. So Stone, you can talk now. Sorry for.
I've been enjoying watching us like a tennis match. I guess I'm, for once, this might be the first time I'm sort of the middle ground here, where I think Philon has some really special qualities as a defender. I think he has great hands at the point of attack, like really good hands. I think he's really good at closing gaps on switches, sealing off any sort of gap during a switch at the point of attack. I think he stays with guys away from the ball, off the ball. I think he runs around the court with those guys really well, sticks to them very closely. I think that I personally thought that he was like maybe it's just the games we watched were different, but I thought he was a pretty decent screen navigator. I thought that for his age, in comparison to a lot of freshman guards, that he fought through screens well. And I mean, sometimes he would get slammed because he's so thin and it would just crunch him. But I thought a lot of times he was good at picking the angles around screens well. I think that
my pushback on the screen nav is he's not. I don't think his screen nav is awful in the sense that he is completely out of place because of screens, but he is never getting skinny through screens and staying in front of guys. He is always giving up a hip, and some of that is strength, right? Like guards that can get any leverage on him are going to keep him from being able to get his top foot over and slide through a screen. So he always has to turn his hips and he always has to get into recovery. So I'm not saying that his screen nav isn't awful in the way that I think Jase's was at times, where Jase could just get hit by a screen and just get out of a play, or he has to switch. Like Philon can execute a drop scheme well enough where he doesn't have to switch, but he's not just sliding through screens and really just dictating what an offense does. He's still a reactive defender on the ball in that way.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think too, I agree with you that he's really good at digging at the nail as a help guy. All those things he does, in my opinion, well, and some of them, very well. But with his frame, how many positions can he do that? Like, is he a one positional defender in the NBA? And if he is, that takes away sort of a lot of the value that I just mentioned, if you're only able to do that against opposing guards. And I struggle with that because his frame is really thin, and at times it really does pop off, especially offensively, like Cooper said, but even defensively at times it does too. And personally, I don't think he really has a frame that's conducive to adding a lot of weight, at least functional muscle to that sort of frame in a way like Fears. If you look at, for example, they have very different body types, and I think that you could just easily tell that Fears can bulk up a bit, where Philon, I think, has a slender frame. And that's, nothing he can change. But it leaves me with some concern as to, how many ways can you utilize Philon? He does all these things really well. That's great, especially at the collegiate level, but at an NBA level where you're dealing with guys that are much bigger and have much more force behind them in terms of driving, how many guys can he actually do that against at the level he did in college? And I think that's where some of my defensive questions come into play. To be honest, I think a guy like Caleb McConnell 2 years ago, I think it was like a much better defender than Philon, just because he's longer, he's stronger, he can do a lot of what he did defensively against more guys, and I think you can use him in more ways. Obviously, offensively, there's a big gap, but defensively speaking, like if that's your biggest sell, I, to be sold on the defensive end, I think you have to be someone that can be used in a multitude of ways. We talked about with Devin Carter whenever he came out, and he's a guy you can put as the low man, you can put as the point of attack, you can put on guards, on some wings. Like he's long enough, he's quick enough, he's vertical enough. I don't see that sort of special with Philon, even though there's aspects to his defense that I really, really like. I'm somewhat worried about against how many guys can he really be that level of guy. So that's sort of my spiel.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Let's transition to the offense. And the truth is, the offense is going to be speculative. He didn't put up crazy numbers. He was, fairly inefficient on low usage. But it's kind of a flashes thing with him, I think. I think there's some flashes. I think there's some hope that, he can be better in time. I did pull some pre-college finishing stats because I think the finishing is a real worry, especially half court finishing. I wish I had the time to hand track his half court versus transition finishing, but anecdotally, I think he was a really bad half court finisher and a fairly good transition finisher. But across, college, he was in the 36th percentile at the rim on 146 attempts. 52.6 effective field goal rate is really bad. According to Synergy, he had 6 dunks. In high school, he was in the 52nd percentile on 109 attempts. 57.6% effective field goal rate, 12 of 14 on dunks. And then at EYBL, he started a little bit more, 73rd percentile, 124 attempts, 60.4 effective field goal rate with 4 dunks. I think EYBL was where he was at his most extreme as a havoc creator defensively. And so a lot of that percentage in EYBL is transition. He was getting out and running. He was leading the break. He was pushing the ball, all that type of stuff. I think for me, my issue with him overall offensively is similar to the defense, where I worry that he's just not a great athlete. He basically is never just dusting a guy off the bounce. He needs a screen. I think there's some flashes of pick and roll craft there. I do like kind of like he has these moments with his tight space handle that I really like. And there's some willingness to like kind of try and change pace and footwork to vary some things, mix up shots and finishes. He goes with his left or his right hand. He'll Euro step. He'll come to 2 feet. He'll shot fake. He'll do all this type of stuff. But it's a tough thing to count on right now because the body and the frame are both pretty bad. The touch is bad, and then he's just not like athletic. Like he's not creating huge advantages as an on ball player right now. And so I think a lot of his value is going to be derived off the ball, and we'll talk about that. But I do think there's a kind of ceiling cap there. So Coop, what am I missing? What do you like about his offense that you think is going to translate that I might be missing here?
I think the main sell is just that he's kind of a hybrid on and off the ball, like truly smaller wing. I think we talked about with Jase, where it's like, do you want a guy who is like really good at really limited stuff, or a guy who has some baseline stuff he can do? And then there's like a lot of flashes of stuff that he's shown that he can do to some degree. There's just more stuff that he was allowed to try. And I think he failed a lot, but there's a few things in there that I really liked and really appreciated. One of those was that I think he gets pretty good shin angles as a driver, but he just like cannot set guys up. Like his handle is, I say I'm a Philon bag believer, but he doesn't like set guys up particularly well in isolation. His best plays offensively are almost always when he's able to get ahead of steam. And he is able to just basically throw his entire body into the paint at full speed. And I think that that's kind of his biggest problem with the touch, is that he's just not, I don't know if it's core strength or balance at the moment, but he's just not able to hold himself composed after he flings his pretty small body into guys full force, right? But I really like that he is out there coming off of a DHO, which Alabama didn't run very many of, but I think that's kind of the way that he brings value to an NBA team. He comes off, a DHO or whatever, he gets downhill, and then he just flings his shoulder as hard as he can into a guy and bumps him off of his spot. Even though he's skinny, he's still trying to use his body, trying to create better angles, and not just willing to settle. It's that kind of aggressiveness that you see. I think that he doesn't take a ton of mid-range shots because that's just not the Nate Oates way. You're not allowed to do that. But he knows when that's a better shot than anything else they're going to get. He knows when that is an acceptable thing. I think the transition play that he brings, I think he's an NBA level transition player day one, as much as that is not something, it's kind of like lob finishing, just because it's like something that you do really well. It's only like max 2 or 3 possessions a game, but I do think transition play, he can get you a few free buckets just off of his ability to get out and run in transition and beat guys back. I think he has really good craft when he's able to be moving full speed, when he's not trying to stop, start, and change speed or try to beat a guy off the dribble. You just need to find pretty simple ways to get him schemed moving, because I think he's quick. I do think that he is like someone, he's not an incredible athlete in any way, but he has that quickness and he has that willingness to throw his body around and work his ass off. And I think that is kind of 2 traits that I'm going to buy into, especially when there's enough flashes for me to believe that, he has the toughness to get on the floor and to figure it out and find a role for a team. And I don't think he needs to put on that much weight, as I know you guys are talking about that he's kind of a limited, his body's kind of limited for putting on that weight. But if he puts on a small amount of weight, I think it's going to go a long, long way because of how willing he is to throw his body around.
Yeah, I think he is quick. I think the difference is he's not twitchy. He's not like very.
He has like an aesthetic twitch, right? Like he looks like he would be really twitchy when he's sitting there hitting all of his moves, but he's not actually that twitchy, right?
What he's actually good at, I think, as a handler is when someone is on his back, kind of experimenting with different moves to try, like we talked about with Jase. Jase goes wide, and if there's a dig there, he's just going to kill his dribble and swing to that guy. Labaron will, especially if it's like not a great shooter to pass. If it's Chris Youngblood or Mark Sears, he's swinging that rock. But if it's not, he'll kind of try and do some like, let me see. Now the tough thing is he's weak. The guys will still get back in front. He doesn't explode out of that very well. But like that's what I like about his handle is he kind of experiments in tight spaces. And listen, he turned the ball over and pick and roll a shit ton. Like the majority of his turnovers were in pick and roll, and I had the numbers written down. I'm not sure I'm going to find them, but he like he had a really high turnover rate in pick and roll. I want to say it was like 20% or something. Like that, I know that's crazy high, but it was really, really high. I'll find that when I pass this to someone else. But that's what I do like about his handle. I'm not sure that there's going to be enough scoring gravity there. I think the shot is mediocre. I think he's going to be a below average NBA shooter. Not a bad, like he's not going to be a guy you're just like leave him completely open. But again, he's not the athlete of some of these other kind of like DeJounte Murray dunked 15 times his freshman year. And there's other guys that I wish I could think of more who are just better athletes that are kind of these same types of mediocre shooters and high variance turnover guys. Like Derek White, meaningfully better athlete vertically than like a Labaron Philon, right? Meaningfully more strength too. So all this combines to me to feel like he's a pre-draft guy who isn't crazy young. Like I think he should go back. This is another guy that I'd say should probably go back to school and put up some better numbers and really refine some of this. I'm really worried about what this translation to the NBA looks like. Now, if he goes to the right team, I think there's a path here, especially like a point guard needy team that maybe has like an older point guard that he can develop, like if the Timberwolves didn't have like Rob Dillingham in weight, I think he'd potentially be a good pick there, where you could develop some of those skills, right? And maybe the role isn't point guard. Maybe it's a lot more like a Nickeil Alexander-Walker type. But Nickeil Alexander-Walker has become a hell of a shooter in a way I'm just not fully sure on with Philon. And Philon doesn't quite have like the feel indicators for me that Alexander Walker had either. So like I like a lot of the disparate elements of Philon's game, and I would definitely draft him. I have him in the same. He's a priority second rounder for me. I have him in the same tier as McNeely and Common Malawak, where he is a. I would definitely give him a contract in the second round, but I wouldn't be rushing to the podium to draft him much before that, and I'd be really specific to make sure that he's in the right developmental context, whether that be developing as an off guard or as kind of a like a more defense first, second side attacking point guard. I'd really want to make sure he's in the right scheme for what I think he could be. That would be that's my take with Philo. There are certain teams where I'd probably be pretty happy with him in the first round, but there's certain teams that I wouldn't touch him with. And so I do think that's a pretty stark contrast for me. But I'll pull up those numbers really fast if Stone and Coop want to let us know where they might have Philon.
Yeah, just to throw in some quick thoughts here on his offense before I give the value is I think he is. I asked people whose opinion I respect and trust, like what do you view as the sell for Philon offensively? Like how do you view his role? And basically all of them said lead initiator. And for me, I just don't see that because it feels like he's the first open pass he makes type of player as a passer and a ball handler where he has a fine handle. I think it's pretty loose, but it's not uncoordinated or anything. But he's not setting guys up like Cooper said. He's not someone that is really able to make complex reads or anything. Even as a secondary guy, it's like if he's driving against tilted defenses and there's not an open shot for him along the way or at the rim, he's passing the very first guy he sees any glimmer of window, and that's sort of the reads that he makes. He does get really good shin angles on drives. The strength really concerns me as a driver and finisher. He gets bumped off his lines, gets bumped around the rim. Not that he's unwilling to do so, as Cooper said, but it does obviously affect the efficiency and accuracy at which he can do it when you're as thin as he is. And I do think he actually has to put on significant weight to really change that. I disagree a bit with Cooper on that, where I think he probably needs like another 10, 15 pounds to really absorb all the contact that he's taking. It's very different where Fears is really good balance-wise, but he's out of control. I think with Philon, he goes into his drives controlled, but the balance is not there. The core strength is not there. He's closer to Jeremiah Fears' older brother Jeremy Fears at Michigan State than anything. But I think in the shooting, we didn't really touch on the shooting. I think he's a really good catch and shoot guy. I question outside of that how versatile he is as a shooter and how efficient he can be when he's not a catch and shoot guy. I think there's some footwork polish that can take place in terms of the quickness in which his feet move and set himself up off the dribble. But all that to say as to where I would value him, I have him in the same tier as Rasheer Fleming at 14th on my board as guys that are late first / early priority seconds for me. And I didn't see it at all with Philon the first few games, and I watched more, and I slowly started seeing a bit of what Cooper, I guess, sees with him, but just not the same extent. I do like a lot of the ancillary things that he does. I just don't think he has any sort of super high end outcomes with what he does, and those and there's a lot of worlds I think that he just doesn't have enough on either side of the ball to last beyond his rookie contract. And that concerns me too. So where I would feel comfortable taking him is the late first or early second.
So for me, Philon is really a difficult question philosophically on my board, because he is so fit dependent for me. I don't see lead initiator. I mean, Bryce pulled it up, 26.3% turnover in the pick and roll. I don't care how young you are. I don't care. What are you doing? And this is with like pretty good pick and roll partners. Like he is not, throwing the ball to some D2, Cornhusker. This is, I really like Omarudi, and as much as Grant Elson is kind of a meme at times, he is a good finisher and a good short roll pick and roll player. I see him as a really interesting DHO secondary option who's just quick and plays hard. And if he was on like the Kings, could he potentially be a starting level player down the line?
You bring up the Kings. I will say I do think like the sell here really is like Keon Ellis. Like what Keon Ellis has become. Keon Ellis, similarly at Alabama, was not a particularly good on-ball defender and has become a disgusting on-ball defender. I think Ellis had more quick twitch athleticism, but I do like Philon's like in dog more, I guess, like his intensity more. Ellis was a bit more of a kind of safe decision maker defensively. Philon is much more willing to fly around and make mistakes, but trust himself to recover. There are little things too, like his closeouts right now are bad and stuff, but I do think I think that's the window he's trying to hit. Be just efficient enough of an offensive player to take advantage of his defense, and his defense has to take a leap for me. And that's what I think that's where you and I are slightly disconnected. I think you're just more in on the defense and at the athleticism than me.
Yeah, I think you just see him as a worse athlete than I do. I'll wrap up here quick for Stone. I'm gonna be thinking about this all year. I'm gonna text you guys about it at least 15 more times. Jase is safer, more of a traditional first round guy because he has stronger strengths. But I like Philon more for certain teams. I would maybe take him as high as like back end of the lottery or like middle 10 to 20, right? Just because that fit could be so good, that developmental context could be so good. Philon is also made in a lab for me to like him. So I really want to be more in on him. But I'll have him right above Jase for now, and I'll continue to debate it.
Absolutely fair. That's all we got. Make sure you guys, Coop, this is where you got to clip this, and you got to put this at the end of every video. Make sure you guys like and subscribe and do all that fun stuff. Give us a rating, review on the podcast app of your choice if you're listening there. But this has been great. We've enjoyed our time. This has been the episode of Swings and BA Draft Podcast. We hope we hit our ceiling. Thank you.
Stone, are you like hard out at 6, or is it like a?
I probably have like 10 extra minutes to play with.
Let's try it. Let's see if we can do it then.
You want to try and see how long Philon will take us? I
don't have a ton to say about him, so I'm good to.
Okay, I'll just get to talk about Philon then.
Let's do it. Okay, all right.